Hi, I'm Meshal Malik, and you're watching Indus Special. As Kashmir enters the 16th day of a complete lockdown of its land, disturbing reports are emerging of the jails in Jammu and Kashmir running out of space. AFP reports that since India scrapped Kashmir's special status on the 5th of August, at least 4,000 people have been detained. These detentions are being linked to Indian-occupied Kashmir's Public Safety Act, often referred to as a lawless law, which allows detention of individuals without charge and without trial for up till 2 years. This law has been highly criticized by human rights groups around the world, including Amnesty International and the United Nations. On today's show, we take a closer look at what is happening in Kashmir in terms of these detentions and the grave human rights violations that are carried out systematically. Joining us for this discussion today is Dr. Lubna Sarwath, activist joining us from Hyderabad, India, Dr. David Lowe, senior researcher, fellow at Leeds Beckett University Law School, with a special focus on research related to terrorism, security, policing, and criminal law. Joining us from Liverpool, UK, we're also joined by Mr. Abubakr Molla, barrister and international law expert, joining us from London, UK. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to the show. Mr. Molla, I'd like to begin with you if I could. Now, I want to set the premise of this discussion that will follow and talk about the Universal Human Rights Declaration and what it states regarding detention and imprisonment when we talk about individuals.
First of all, I would like to start by the Amnesty International comment on this very specific act. Amnesty International has said it is a draconian law. They want to publish a report in June about the human rights abuse and the violations and the problems surrounding the law. Jammu and Kashmir administration has denied even to publish and release the report done by an independent international human rights NGO, Amnesty International. Now, the various report has come from various independent international organizations, such as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and some other organizations like that. So it is very clear report that there are human rights being.
Right. Dr. David Lowe, while we're talking about this, I do want to first and foremost talk about the Universal Human Rights Declaration and what are the rights given to people who are being detained or imprisoned. Could you take us through that?
Yeah, there's a whole raft of rights, I think, potentially being violated here in Kashmir. You were talking about the rest, so we talked to right to liberty and freedom. So in effect, an arrest has to be lawful. Right to fair trial. Well, as you said in the introduction here to this issue, detaining someone without charge for up to 2 years, there's a clear potential violation of right to fair trial. And other concerns, I think, if you look at the whole events that's gone on, is there violations on the prohibition of torture? We don't know what's going on with those who've been arrested. And quite clearly, other factors is right to expression, freedom of expression, right of assembly. Once Article 370 was brought out, where they said, that Kashmir now has no special status. There was no consultation at all. So, any legitimate protest, obviously, quite clearly, that's just been quashed. And as you said, up to 4,000 people have been arrested. So there's a whole raft of rights here, I think, are a big cause of concern, not just for Kashmir, but I think for the whole of the international community.
Yeah, and you say that it's a concern for the international community. Why do you think that's so?
Well, India states it's a democratic state. I mean, it does have its elections. It's the largest democracy in the world. And one would expect a democratic state to comply with its constitution. I mean, it has a written constitution. And if you look at other federal states, to have changes in a constitution is not so easy. There's a process to go through, but to just have a government, Prime Minister Modi there just says, right, we're now going to revoke Article 370. There's been no judicial process. Right. There's been no consultation with the Parliament over it.
Right. And I want to jump to Dr. Sarwath and talk a little more about what's happening on ground and the localized context of all of this. Now, as it's mentioned that India claims that it is the largest democracy in the world. Now, the fact that everything that has happened preceding the revocation of Article 370 and talking about all these people that are being detained, let's unpack why does India feel like it's necessary to have this law in Kashmir in the first place where you can detain people without charge or without trial?
The act done by abrogation of Article 370 of the Constitution was done in the most unconstitutional manner. We have to be clear on that. And it was most undemocratic. Now, numerous luminaries, whether on the political economy side or on the legal side, are very clear in telling that the setting aside of the Article 370 is something which is not possible because even the Supreme Court in its orders in 2017 and 2018 have declared that Article 370 is of a permanent nature. The point why it is of permanent nature is that when the instrument of accession was signed, and after that there's something known as the Constituent Assembly. The president, even before the Kashmir Act of Reorganization Act 2019 was being passed in the Rajya Sabha, before that there was a presidential order.
Right.
That order itself is unconstitutional because it is clearly mentioned how to deal with Article 370 is mentioned in the Article 370 itself.
Right.
And it is mentioned that only the president will have the power and he can do it only on the recommendation of the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. And Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, they had dissolved themselves after the constitution, after they accessing themselves to India.
Right.
So there is no Constituent Assembly
Dr.
right
Sarwath, sorry to interrupt here, but you've given us a very important highlight of what has happened so far. But I do want to go back to the detentions that were happening in Kashmir. And this is not just after this article was revoked. This has been happening since 1978, since the Public Safety Act was put in place. Now, take us through why you think this was important for the Indian state to implement this act in the first place.
See, the reasons being, let us look at the reasons being stated by the government of India that did this act, And if you look at that, the elected representatives, the elected chief ministers of the Jammu and Kashmir, elected means that they are very much a part of, they participated in the democratic process of the country. So, a chief minister with whom the ruling party BJP itself was having a coalition government. So such chief ministers, 3 ex-chief ministers and MPs, sitting MPs, if they are being detained, right now also they are under detention. And just imagine even the ex-chief minister who was in coalition with the present ruling government in Jammu and Kashmir, even her daughter is being detained. So when you understand that the political leadership is being so detained, the Indian participated. It's not about if you tell that, they are asking for separatist Kashmir, so I'm detaining.
Right.
It's not like that.
Dr. Sarwath, hold on to that thought. I want to talk in depth about the implications of all that is happening on the political front, what is going to happen in Kashmir and what is happening in Kashmir. But before that, I'd like to go back to Mr. Abubakr Molla and talk to him a little about the laws and the double standard of sorts that applies to Indian administrated Kashmir when we talk about the Indian state. Now, in the Indian Constitution itself, it enshrines the right for people to have a fair trial before being detained. But in Kashmir, that doesn't happen. Also, what we're seeing right now is that there is a complete blackout. The communication lines have been cut. Now, that is curtailing the right of freedom of expression. Now, tell us how this is in violation of the human rights and international laws out there.
Okay. Previously, one of the contributor today from UK has said that clearly that India is violating their promise and their obligation to Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But moreover, India is a signatory to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. and they have incorporated these laws into their constitution. So, according to these ICCPR laws, the citizens of Kashmir or any citizen of India has right to fair trial, right to freedom of assembly and association. So the reports clearly shows that the citizens of Kashmir, Kashmir's rights of assembly and association and the right to fair justice are not being observed, and they are not getting right to fair trial. They are being detained, violating the rights given by the ICCPR and as it was incorporated in the Indian Constitution. So clearly these are not only the violation of international laws, clearly they are also violating the laws of Indian Constitution.
Right.
So that's why we, part of the international community, we are very concerned that India should really maintain and observe their commitment to the international community as they are one of the signatories to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
Right. Dr. David Lowe, talking more about what's happening in India, but also trying to understand what's happening there from other examples around the world. Are there any other places in the world that practice such draconian laws, such as the Public Safety Act? And if they do so, what is the rationale given on part of these governments for exercising a law such as this?
Well, it's interesting we talk about arrests. You could even argue what we're potentially witnessing here is internment. I know it's a play on words, but it's being arrested because someone's maybe a threat to the state. I mean, I don't have to look too far back in time or geographically. During the Irish Troubles, when they started, and you look through in the 70s into the early 1980s, the government in Westminster brought out internment, brought out diplock courts. That's a trial by judge, not by jury. And I think the fear was at that time that this would de-escalate any potential violence. But of course, what happens when you introduce such programs? The reverse happens. And it's not only that, which is a good point, is that the international community can actually get behind this. And I think that's important in this case of Kashmir, that the international community put pressure on Prime Minister Modi to rethink what's going on in Kashmir. As she said, you have the blackout. We don't know what's going on. It's on leaked information, maybe the odd journalist who's had the advantage of coming out and telling us. But, you know, India is a democratic state. Start acting like one when it comes to the area of Jammu and Kashmir. It really is important. Otherwise, I think really, you know, other states have now got to take a stronger position with them. Right. I mean, Prime Minister Imran Khan has already started this and started to get the international community moving on it. I think that's important.
Right, and we're talking about the international community taking a stand and putting pressure on the Modi government. Now, I wonder here, are there any legal platforms that can be, that this case can be taken to? And not just what's happening right now, but all these acts, these draconian laws that existed before what has happened after the 5th of August. I mean, the United Nations came out with a report in 2019. It explicitly stated that these laws need to be rethought, they need to be reworked, and they need to be scrapped because they're completely undemocratic and they are obstructing the form of justice. Now, are there any international legal platforms people can go and take this issue to?
Well, you can start by going to the UN. I mean, I'm sort of hoping this wouldn't happen, but if you start to then look even further, if there's more atrocities as this escalation builds up, because the tension is quite high, like we saw with the Yugoslavian civil war in that area, there is a potential, possibly, for what we would call war crimes. If people have been killed for no other reason that they just oppose a government, there is that recourse, but that really is going to the extreme. But I think at the moment, it's going to the UN, and let's start getting this charter applied to certain legislation, like the one we're talking about, that India is imposing in Kashmir. I think that is the first step, and starting to go to the international court and say, look, enough is enough.
Right.
let's start, acting, as I said, like a democratic country.
Right. Dr. Lubna Sarwath, now talking about what's been happening in the Modi years, especially when we talk about Kashmir, what do you think has changed in these recent years, ever since Modi came into power, about the people living in Kashmir, how their lives have changed?
Yeah, see, the first and foremost thing that will hurt you is that you were not taken into confidence even before there is something so drastically and reductionist approach was being made towards Kashmir. Just imagine a state being turned into a union territory. It was a backward move. Union territories become states, become more full-fledged towards a democratic step of having their own elected assembly and passing their own acts and laws. But here it was a regressive measure.
And why do you think that these people are not being taken into confidence at this point in time? Why do you think it is that the government of India fears actually having dialogue with the Kashmiri people?
Yeah, democracy is all about discussion first. But if the government is fearing a question, and if the government is fearing a discussion, then you know what, it is losing its own identity and its own its existence itself is under question now. Now, you have raised a question as to why are they fearing? What are they fearing? See, let us always remember across the world and about my country also, whenever your intention is mollified, you will not entertain discussion and dialogue. You will make an arbitrary decision. And that is exactly what has happened. And you know what the announcement was made when on August 5th? That now the land will be open. So is it about land? And if they tell that they have a separate constitution, Kashmir has a separate flag, well, even Nagaland, on August 15th, Nagaland, one of the states with no special articles such as Kashmir, it is a state of India, it hoisted its own flag on Independence Day. And there are so many states in the northeastern countries and in the northern part of India where you cannot purchase land. And just imagine, just yesterday, the bureaucrats and other people from Kashmir, army people, they have filed a bill in the Supreme Court. Now there are 7 petitions in the Supreme Court challenging the Reorganization Act 2019 and challenging the very presidential order itself.
Right.
All these people are of Kashmir and also from outside Kashmir, and they are questioning this because the government, by doing this, has actually opened the door that they can do this with other states also.
Right. Now,
so why they don't
Dr. Sarwath, you're highlighting some very essential points here, how it is also creating precedents within India and how the fear of creating or having a meaningful dialogue is because you know you're on the wrong there. You know that the outcome and the backlash will not be something that you will be able to reconcile with. But before we move on, I want to talk a little more about the human rights violations going on within Kashmir. And I want to show a little clip compiled by civil rights activists from India who went and toured Indian-occupied Kashmir after August 5th. And we'll see what they say there. Let's take a look.
से उठाई थी बताओ? हाँ, फैसलाबाद से। और नमाज क्या करने गए?
नमाज पढ़ने गए।
और उसके बाद में कितने दिन रखी वहाँ पे?
5-6 दिन।
क्या की वहाँ पे तुम्हारे साथ?
मारा ना।
अच्छा। और भी बच्चे हैं तुम्हारे जैसे?
हाँ, बहुत छोटे।
कितने?
10-12।
इसी गांव से?
हाँ।
तुमसे बड़े और तुमसे छोटे?
मेरे से बड़े भी, मेरे से छोटे भी।
तुम्हारी उम्र क्या है? तुम्हारी उम्र कितनी?
11 साल।
और तुम्हारे गांव के अलावा और भी इलाकों से बच्चे?
हाँ, बहुत सारे।
तुम्हें कैसे जंगल से बांध करके?
हाँ।
All right, so in the clip, what these activists are trying to demonstrate is that these children are being detained within Indian-occupied Kashmir, children as young as the age of 11, and with them are also younger children, age 9, age 10. Now, this also highlights, while we talk about human rights violations, which are extremely grave, we're also talking about how the rights of children that are enshrined in the global constitutions are also being violated. Dr. David Lowe, talking about that, what are the rights of children, especially minors, in international law?
It's just it's incredible when you think, you look at the ages we're talking about who are being detained. It just beggars belief that we're watching this today in a democracy. Of course, they have rights, and they have. When I say they have more rights than adults, it's because you're looking at the protection and welfare of that child, and they have to be looked after. Now, have they got appropriate adults? Have they got social care for them? What's happening as regards their own welfare? These measures have got to be put in place, but to start arresting 9-year-olds, 11-year-olds, because quite simply an association perhaps with an adult who is against the government at the time is completely wrong and should be absolutely heavily criticised by the international community. I keep saying the international community. We have the Commonwealth as well. It is times perhaps members of the Commonwealth, and not just Pakistan who's criticising India, but other members of the Commonwealth. That's another avenue to put pressure on India, as well as other guarantee bodies like the UN.
Right. And Mr. Abubakr Molla, just building on to the point Dr. Lowe was talking about here. Now, while minors are being detained and the international community needs to put greater pressure on India to take a hold of the situation here. Now, what are the conditions of fair detention? If we talk about the process before that we have established is unfair. But when you are in detention, what does international law say about protecting the civilian in custody in terms of torture, in terms of food, in terms of security? Shed some insight into that.
Okay. You have asked a question previously. What are the international mechanisms to tackle the problems in Kashmir? What international community or international institutions can do to tackle this issue? First of all, India is not a member of International Criminal Court. The crimes which are being committed in Kashmir, these are sort of crimes against humanity. These are sort of genocide. These are sort of war crimes. And these are international crimes. These international crimes are being tried only in International Criminal Court based in Hague. But Pakistan is a member of International Criminal Court, and as some of the Kashmiris who are the victims of the crimes, international crimes, such as crimes against humanity, crimes against genocide, and the war crimes. And those people who has flagged Indian administration Kashmir because of torture, because of international crimes, they can file a case against Indian authority to the International Criminal Court. And what Dr. David Lowe has mentioned, that if someone can approach to UN for the war crimes, it is not very straightforward. Only a member of Security Council can open this case or make a request, make an application to the UN Security Council. And then UN Security Council need to pass a resolution to form a special international court. But what I'm saying in a nutshell is that the crimes which are being committed in Kashmir, these are amounting to international crime, such as crimes against humanity, genocide, and the war crimes. Right. And Modi and his the colleagues who are ordering for the crimes being committed in Kashmir, one day, if the case is being filed in International Criminal Court, they can be tried.
Right, and Mr. Abubakr Molla, you're highlighting how these are amounting to crimes against humanity, and that's a point I want to carry forward. But first, I'd like to thank you for joining us and talking to us. Dr. Lubna Sarwath, now, as you heard our guests talk about how these are grave violations, and also they're amounting to crimes against humanity, I wonder what the on-ground sentiments in India is regarding all that is happening in Kashmir. Tell us about when you talk to people, when you talk to activists, what are their opinions about what is happening in Kashmir?
Yeah, as you rightly saw, one of the reports of the 4 activists, they are leading activists of our country, highly credible people, and they had been to Kashmir and they gave out the report to the entire country and to the entire world. So we saw that the Press Club of India, where they were actually addressing the press, they were not given the choice of running their video. Even that permission was not given to them. So we are seeing that more and more people from institutions and more and more people from media are actually trying to highlight the abrogation of 370 and what is happening in Kashmir as a necessary part. They are not able to see, or they don't want to see, that democracy has been suppressed there, and basic fundamental rights of celebration of Eid, and where basic children want to contact their parents, that is not being allowed. So much so that the ex-topper of IAS, Shah Faisal, who is a very clean person, a person of high integrity, he was traveling to, to complete his education at Harvard. So much so that he was detained at Delhi airport and sent back to Kashmir. I mean, what do they want to demonstrate? What does the government of India want to demonstrate? It cannot trash upon our country all this. We are our constitution and we are our people. A handful and one-off government cannot rob away the democracy from us. Only S.J. Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate from India, he said democracy is all about discussion and dialogue.
Lubna Sarwath, carrying on from your point and talking to Dr. David Lowe, now it seems like India's justification for detaining people is often that they're trying to maintain public order and safety. Now, what is the definition of public order, one that is accepted across globally and one that a person can contest with, when you're talking about the fact that these detentions are not, in fact, a violation of public order? What definition can we work with?
Yeah, for public order, if you're looking about it, it's about ensuring you've got the right balance, that people have the right to their freedom of expression, they're having their assembly, but other people have the freedom to go about their business. And also another factor with public order is to ensure safety of citizens, the physical safety, and of course the safety and security of the state.
So Dr. David Lowe, what's very ironic is that all the things that you have mentioned that fall in the category of public order, which is allowing people to have freedom of expression, making sure that your civilians are secure and safe, it seems like India is violating all of this for the purpose of maintaining public order. Is that a contradiction we could agree to?
I totally agree with you on this one. I don't want to prejudge what happens ahead, but quite clearly, if you're basically just clearing the streets of people, you're detaining people because they have a different view to you. This is not public order. This is more the action of a despotic regime rather than a democracy, and something I've been sort of saying throughout this program. It's just that it goes against what, as we were saying there, what is public order? It goes against achieving that balance between safety, security, and freedom of movement.
Right. On that point, we have to go for a break. Thank you so much, Dr. David Lowe, for joining us, and Dr. Lubna Sarwath for joining us. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to discuss what's happening in Kashmir further. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, as Kashmir is under an information blackout with phone networks and the internet suspended, freedom of speech seems to no longer exist in the region. In India, too, while much less blatant, it seems that dissenting voices are being silenced, especially when it comes to Kashmir. We discuss in greater depth about the implications of this. Joining us for this discussion is Ms. Revati Laul, journalist and author of the book Anatomy of Hate, joining us from Delhi. We're also joined by Mr. Ranjit Singh, activist and member of the Human Rights Committee, World Sikh Parliament, joining us from London. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Mr. Singh, I'd like to begin with you. Now, on the 15th of August, you and many other members of the community in London arranged a protest in solidarity with the Kashmiri people. Tell us about the on-ground sentiments of everyone who is in London right now and also who participated in that protest.
Yeah, sure. The protest that was organised, the joint protest, between Sikh and Kashmiri organizations held outside the Indian High Commission on India's so-called Independence Day. I say so-called because the 15th of August marks anything but independence as far as the Sikh nation is concerned and as far as the Kashmiris are concerned. Coming to the event itself.
Right. And you're saying that it is not a day of independence for the Sikh community and for the Kashmiris. Now, do you feel like that is widely recognized and accepted all across the world now, that for the Kashmiri people specifically in this case, 15th of August wasn't a day of independence?
Completely. The steps taken by the Indian government to abrogate Article 370 and 335A, they purported to remove a so-called or a notional level of autonomy. But genuine sentiment on the ground, the authentic Kashmiri leadership has been saying for 70 years that even 370, which has now been withdrawn, and Kashmir has, according to Modi's diktat, been made a so-called union territory where he can carry out his Hindutva practices without any constitutional restrictions on him. But, you know, the Kashmiri sentiment, so far as I, as a non-Kashmiri, can gather in talking to the Kashmiri diaspora here in the UK, and indeed with the links with Kashmiris abroad, the sentiment is that actually this is neither about autonomy nor about the abrogation of this so-called autonomy. This really is an issue about freedom, and the 15th of August 1947 definitely did not deliver freedom for the Kashmiris.
Right. And Ms. Laul, going to you and talking a little more about this. Now, we're hearing about the feelings and sentiments of the diaspora, of people who live in other countries, but we're just not hearing about the sentiments or the feelings of the people with whom everything is happening, the Kashmiris, because their voice is being silenced. Now, talking about the freedom of expression and the right to have it, now that's a right enshrined in India's constitution as well. But how do you feel in recent years, and especially in the Modi years, this has been curtailed?
Actually, the hollowing out of our institutions goes back well before Modi. We have a history that dates back to the Congress, showing what actually the worst example of it during the emergency rule that was imposed by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in 1975. However, in recent years, in recent living memory, the difference between perhaps what journalists faced in the emergency was that they were going up against an imposition from the top. Whereas this time, to quote the Indian writer Arundhati Roy, Kashmir has been occupied by India and India has been occupied by the mob, is what she said in a piece she wrote, I think, in the New York Times recently. And that aptly describes the difference between 1975 and 5th August 2019, when the deep state and the mob and sort of belligerent Hindu nationalists, bolstered by a leader that they consider to be the author of their kind of politics, where how much of that is true or not is anybody's guess at this point. But the fact is that that deep state seems to have acquired a life of its own and is a beast that is unleashed all across the internet, all across the social media space, all across the actual spaces where journalists operate.
Right, and take us through that. How is this deep state actually, in fact, working? Give us the details of that.
Yes. So what happens is, for example, when journalists, colleagues of mine, I haven't been in this time since the 5th of August into Kashmir, but colleagues of mine that have been in Kashmir recently, and when they have recorded protests happening on the streets, and people in Kashmir are telling them, we are unafraid of the bullet. We are so angry, we're so sick of feeling disenfranchised that we are not afraid to die. And when people are saying this, these voices are getting muzzled, these opinions are being discredited as fabricated news, when in fact fake news of people celebrating the abrogation of 370 and taking away of the autonomy of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, which is not actually in fact being celebrated, is being touted as the real news, and the real news is getting suppressed by various actors, state, non-state, partisan politicians. And it's a very sort of toxic mix that we are up against as journalists. Whereas the government officially obviously says that they enshrine Article 19 of the Constitution, which says that we have the right to the freedom of expression and it's a fundamental right. However, in practice, there is a mobocracy in place that scares people, and how it operates is at 2 or 3 levels. In recent years, what has happened is media houses are scared. Their owners many of them in the mainstream, they will never say this, but in whisper campaigns, they say, you know, we're scared that we will have raids from income tax departments and our financial assets will be in danger. There will be a freeze on them imposed under fake corruption cases, and then we will not be able to function and the media houses will collapse. So in order to prevent that, they are actually capitulating and delivering PR campaigns instead of the news.
Right.
And the people that are actually doing that job are still doing that job, but there is such a voluble amount of nonsense and toxicity that the real news gets buried under it. It's not as if journalists like us are not doing our job, it's that it's getting buried.
Yeah, and Ms. Laul, that's a very important point, that the news that actual journalists are trying to bring to the forefront is getting buried. Now, Mr. Ranjit Singh, to that point, I wonder, what does the international community make out of the narratives that are coming out of India at this point in time? We do know that India is very strong on soft powers in putting their industries, such as the film industry, at the forefront, putting out this narrative. Now, and as Ms. Laul mentioned, that it's not that journalists aren't doing their jobs, it is that news that is credible is getting buried. Now, what picture is being painted to the outside world in regards to all of this?
I think the situation is quite fluid. So for many years, India was considered by many in the West as a benign power, a secular federal setup, where multicultural, multi-religious, even multinational subsistence was possible. Now, obviously, that's not true. Those who know India know that may have been the ideal back when the constitution was set up, but it was never the reality. And over recent years, with the Hindutva forces taking control of India, lock, stock and barrel, it's become apparent to outside observers that India actually now is not a benign place, it's a malign place, especially for minorities. So it is accepted, and journalists across the world accept this. Just a couple of days ago, the BBC, which is a pretty conservative news outlet, the BBC was reporting that the people in Kashmir had risen up against the steps taken by the Modi government over Article 370, and that there were protests, there were firing on the protests, pellet gun use, tear gas use, and the headline here in London from the BBC was that, here are pictures of a protest and brutal repression of that protest, which India denies happened. So people are realizing this.
Right. Going back to you and a little about all of this, now it seems like the international community is becoming cognizant of the fact that this is the reality in India. Do you think Modi is, at some point in time, the blackout in Kashmir will have to be lifted? Is the Modi government anticipating and expecting a backlash? And what do you think have they kept in mind for dealing with that?
It's anyone's guess. The press has absolutely no access to our Prime Minister or the decision makers in his cabinet. But the pictures you're flashing in front of you right now on screen are from a press conference of a 4-member group that went in, civil society activists. You see Kavita Krishnan's face of the Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist, who went in for 5 days, and they traveled extensively across Kashmir. And they brought back reports of atrocities being committed, of people saying that they are protesting. The Press Club of India in New Delhi, where this press conference was held, and I was one of the people attending it amongst many other journalists from around the world. The press club actually stopped the streaming of the video footage that accompanied their report. And then later they denied it, saying, when we confronted them and said, please explain, how are you, as a press club, not holding up the freedom of expression, and why are you caving in? For what reason? At whose behest? And they had no answers, and then they round-tripped this and said, no, well, actually we did, we didn't. So, there is so much self-censorship and fear in the atmosphere, but that self-censorship comes at the behest of very real, tangible fears, because people have been charged with sedition, people have been picked up, people have been put away on arguably flimsy or untenable grounds. Protests have been called non-protests. In fact, The Wire, an online media publication that is extremely responsible and is doing a sterling job, just published a report yesterday, a video report, in which they showed protesters in Kashmir now carrying banners with the date of the protest written on top so that it cannot be touted as fake. That is very significant. I don't think I've ever seen a protest like that in the history of this country, where people are putting the date of the protest on top of it. They were also carrying banners saying that they uphold, they salute BBC and Al Jazeera. And there were also banners decrying some of the tabloid journalists in India. So they've been looking, Kashmiris have been looking very carefully at who's doing their job and who's not. And of course, the establishment must be worried. That is the reason that there is a complete information blackout, that there is a complete taking away of the basic fundamental rights of the people of the now Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir, because they obviously fear that this is being done without popular support, without a mandate for it.
Right, and that's Ms. Laul, that's a very, very essential point that you're highlighting, that the fact that there is a blackout, the establishment knows that this has gone against the will of the Kashmiri people. They know that they are in the wrong, something that we reiterated previously in this show as well, that the blackout in itself is evidence of the fact that whatever happened, however it unfolded, was against the Kashmiri people's wills. Mr. Singh, just a last question to you before we wind up this segment. Now, how important is it at this point in time, as Ms. Laul has told us, that self-censorship in India is rampant, but it's not without cause. There are certain reasons, there are very, very real fears why people have to go through this. And in Kashmir, we know that there's a complete blackout. How important is it for the international community, and I'm not just talking about government leaders, but activists taking part and being the voice, or at least raising the voice for the cause?
I think it's absolutely essential. I mean, Imran Khan, Pakistan's Prime Minister, said that he would be the ambassador for Kashmir. But you're right, it needs to go beyond that. We need governments across the world to intervene. For a long time, the Indian narrative on this has been that it's an internal matter, or even that it's a bilateral matter between India and Pakistan. The events of the last week or two absolutely demonstrate, clear as you would want it to be demonstrated, that this has to be resolved through international intervention. Without that, I'm afraid Kashmir is headed, and I say this with a heavy heart and with apprehension on behalf of the Kashmiris, Kashmiris are going to face a potential genocide here with the kind of Nazi policies that we see from the BJP. Without international intervention at every level, from bilateral intervention, multilateral, the United Nations itself, from the media, from people on the ground, activists, organizations, diaspora communities. Right. Everybody's going to have to get involved here.
Right. And on that note, thank you so much, Mr. Singh, for joining us from London and taking out the time to talk to us. And thank you so much, Ms. Revati Laul, for joining us and talking to us from Delhi. Now, the picture that's been painted by all our guests is one that is extremely bleak. It is time for the international community to take notice of what is happening and take substantial actions towards trying to help those who are trapped in this situation, in this case, the Kashmiri people. With that, we have come to the end of our show. Thank you so much for watching. We will be back tomorrow with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.